know this. It's actually, there's an excerpt in the book Anti-Civilization by Marshall Solons. The original essay was called The Original Affluent Society, and it's in a book called Stone Age Economics, which I think is a great title in itself. That was published in 1972 in English. It's a wonderful piece. I think it is it's profound and, to me, moving, and it holds up pretty darn well, and this is pretty old. And I want to read about a page and from the beginning and then jump to the final paragraph or two, which I think pretty much summarizes it. Oh, and I wanted to say, Solons, who's still around, by the way, uses, there's two problems with the terminology. One is the sexist pronouns here and there, which is kind of too bad, but I just wanted to point it out. And the other one is he refers to hunter-gatherers and just hunters for short. And we know, actually, just within a few years, that was challenged, especially by feminist scholarship in the field, that it should be gatherer-hunters because, roughly speaking, 80% of sustenance came from gathering, not from hunting. That's a sweeping generalization, but that's pretty much accepted. And in many, many societies, it was mostly women that did the gathering, although in some societies it's women that did the hunting. Anyway, it's not always now, the usage is not always gatherer-hunter, but sometimes it's forager or collector or band society. In other words, the hunter part was falling away already, I think. Sorry?
No, it's all right.
Okay. Anyway, hunter-gatherers consume less energy per capita per year than any other group of human beings. Yet when you come to examine it, the original affluent society was none other than the hunters, in which all the people's material wants were easily satisfied. To accept that hunters are affluent is therefore to recognize that the present human condition of man slaving to bridge the gap between his unlimited wants and his insufficient means is a tragedy of modern times. There are two possible courses to affluence. Wants may be, quote, easily satisfied either by producing much or desiring little. The familiar conception, the Galbraithian way, based on the concept of market economies, states that man's wants are great, not to say infinite, whereas his means are limited, though they can be improved. Thus, the gap between means and ends can be narrowed by industrial productivity, at least to the point that urgent goods become plentiful. But there is also a Zen road to affluence, as he calls it, which states that human material wants are finite and few, and technical means unchanging but on the whole adequate. Adopting the Zen strategy, a people can enjoy an unparalleled material plenty with a low standard of living. That, I think, describes the hunters, and it helps explain some of their more curious economic behavior, their prodigality, for example, the inclination to consume at once all stocks on hands as if they had it made. Free from market obsessions of scarcity, hunters' economic propensities may be more consistently predicated on abundance than our own. The traditional dismal view of the hunter's fix goes back to the time Adam Smith was writing, and probably to a time before anyone was writing. Probably it was one of the first distinctly Neolithic prejudices, an ideological appreciation of the hunter's capacity to exploit the earth's resources most congenial to the historic task of depriving him of the same. In other words, these people are so deficient, they have no right or position in the scheme of things, so they should be dispossessed, and that's the normal course of the dominant economic model. We must have inherited it with the seed of Jacob, which, quote, spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north, to the disadvantage of Esau, who was the elder son, but in a famous scene deprived of his birthright. Current low opinions of the hunter-gatherer economy need not be laid to Neolithic ethnocentrism, Bourgeois ethnocentrism will do as well. The existing business economy will promote the same dim conclusions about the hunting life. Is it so paradoxical to contend that hunters have affluent economies, their absolute poverty notwithstanding? Modern capitalist societies, however richly endowed, dedicate themselves to the proposition of scarcity. Inadequacy of economic means is the first principle of the world's wealthiest peoples. The market industrial system institutes scarcity in a manner completely without parallel. Where production and distribution are arranged through the behavior of prices, and all livelihoods depend on getting and spending, insufficiency of material means becomes the explicit calculable part of all, or point of all economic activity. The entrepreneur is confronted with alternative investments of a finite capital, the worker, hopefully, with alternative choices of remunerative employment, and the consumer, well, consumption is a double tragedy. What begins in inadequacy will end in deprivation. Bringing together an international division of labor, the market makes available a dazzling array of products, all these good things within one's reach, but never all within his grasp. Worse, in this game of consumer free choice, every acquisition is simultaneously a deprivation, for every purchase of something is a foregoing of something else. In general, only marginally less desirable, and in some particulars, more desirable that one could have had instead. The sentence of a life at hard labor was passed uniquely upon us. Scarcely is the judgment decreed by our economy, or scarcity is the judgment decreed by our economy. And it is precisely from this anxious vantage that we look back upon hunters. But if modern man with all his technological advantages still lacks the wherewithal, what chance has the naked savage with his puny bow and arrow? Having equipped the hunter with bourgeois impulses and Paleolithic tools, we judge his situation hopeless in advance. And then in conclusion, and what about the world today? 1/3 to 1/2 of humanity are said to go to bed hungry every night. In the old Stone Age, the fraction must have been much smaller. And now, I think it's worth pointing out that very recently, there's even more starvation. There are food riots in dozens of places. And what is new about that is diverting food resources to biofuels to keep the machine going. It's really stark. That's the new part of it, and the sharpening crisis of just what he's talking about here. This is the era of hunger unprecedented. Of course, he wasn't anticipating that, but it's perfectly apropos, I think. Now, in the time of the greatest technical power, is starvation an increasing situation? Reverse another venerable formula. The amount of hunger increases relatively and absolutely with the evolution of culture. This paradox is my whole point. Hunters and gatherers have, by force of circumstances, an objectively low standard of living, but taken as their objective and given their adequate means of production, all the people's material wants usually can be easily satisfied. The world's most primitive peoples have few possessions, but they are not poor. Poverty is not a small amount of goods, nor is it just a relation between means and ends. Above all, it is a relation between people. Poverty is a social status. As such, it is the invention of civilization. It has grown with civilization at once as an invidious distinction between classes, and more importantly, as a tributary relation that can render agrarian peasants more susceptible to natural catastrophes than any winter camp of Alaskan Inuit. I think that really says so much, and it really holds up, and it has to do with a rather stunning new picture that started coming up around the time Sullins, and he was part of the new wave. And You know, it's